Welcome to the future of retail. I'm Stephen Quinonez, co-founder and CTO at LocateAI, and today I'm talking about retail trends with Robert Kluger, Chief Development Officer at Kura Sushi. Robert, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. Pleasure to be here.
So this is a pretty unique time for us to be having this conversation. This is probably a period of extreme change in retailers, consumer behavior, commercial real estate. So there's a lot for us to go through. Just to get us started, we're recording this on May 21st. The lay of the land right now as we speak, because things change day to day. A lot of states have been reopening over the last 2 weeks. That's sort of been the theme, and I think that's what's on everyone's mind. In terms of coronavirus cases, we are seeing, at least according to the numbers that are reported, state by state and county by county, gradual decrease. So daily new cases and daily deaths, though still much higher than we would like them to be, are slowly trickling down. And that's caused a lot of states to react by taking steps forward in the reopening plans. I'm curious, Robert, as somebody who's in-house at a prominent retailer, sit-down dining experience, how are you taking in all this information, and what's your or your team's mentality around reopening?
Yeah, so it's actually been a topic that, of course, we're monitoring on a daily basis. It's very because we are sit down. We don't really have a huge takeout component. All of our dining's inside. We're a revolving sushi bar, so there's no very limited table service. Because of that, we're erring on the side of cautiousness.
Right.
Our company right now, we're about 50% concentrated in California. And then we also have several stores in Texas and one in Georgia, one in Nevada, one in Illinois. And our strategy right now has been, we are going in states that have kind of loosened up a little bit, like Texas and Georgia. We're actually reopening this weekend. I think it's crazy. It's not crazy, but every municipality has a different guideline.
Yep.
Because most of the the federal government and most of the state governors are like, okay, you can go ahead and do this, but it's up to the local authorities to decide whether it's safe or not in their areas.
Right.
So there's different guidelines in different areas. So we're kind of adhering to the most conservative guideline in each area. So if there's some gray area, we're again tending to err on the side of conservatism, because we certainly don't want any of our guests to feel unsafe at our restaurants. Nor any of our associates who are coming back after being out for a little bit. So we're really going to see how those three go, and then we have Las Vegas right now. We have scheduled to open next week. Same guideline. They're at a 50% occupancy,
Okay.
and a lot of it's going to depend how the business looks this weekend as to how we proceed from there.
Are you expecting the traffic really to be coming back, or is this more of a, we're just going to see what happens and reopen according to the guidelines and then adjust accordingly?
Yeah, we're not expecting traffic to come back the way it was. So, what we're hearing is anywhere from the industry that has, and the restaurants that have reopened, we're hearing anywhere from 30 to 40% of their business prior.
These are sit-down restaurants?
For sit-down restaurants. Sorry, yeah. I know it's much greater for drive-thrus and fast casual, but for sit-down restaurants. And we're kind of expecting that same number. It would be, and especially with the seating restrictions that we have, now these stores that we're opening are a little larger on purpose because we can seat more people even in a limited seating capacity. But we know that those are, getting more than even 50% is going to be a challenge initially.
Got it. I mean, on our side, we've been tracking mobile activity on our side and plotting the weekly cadence. And I've been personally a little bit surprised to see actually the vigor with which some consumers are coming back to these stores as they're reopening. Last week, I think we saw a jump in retail activity of around 20%. We're currently sitting around -30 from the baseline. Versus a couple of weeks ago, we were at -50. So this reopening has really seemed to increase. I thought people would be a little bit more reluctant to come back to, especially dining, like in-person dining. Do you have a reaction to that? Has that been surprising to you at all, or?
Yeah, actually, it's been pretty pleasantly surprising, but I'm still cautiously optimistic, and we are here at Kura as well, because we think there is some pent up demand.
Mm-hmm.
So as these places start opening, people, I mean, you and I are sitting in our homes right now. We just want to, we want to get out. We're
Right.
as the human animal, we desire to get out and do things and socialize. And I think that what's happening right now is people who have been sitting in their homes, as we've all been instructed to do for going on 2 months now, we're just going to be anxious to get out. And I'm anticipating this big swell of business right when it opens. Then I think my gut tells me that you start looking, I go, wow, people are like, way more people are going out than we thought were going to go out. And maybe this isn't super safe. And what it comes down to is, where do I feel safe? Where do I feel okay taking my family to dine? And I think there's going to be some kind of correction coming back. I mean, it'd be great if it sustains at this level and everyone's safe. That would be the best ideal scenario.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great segue into a question I had for you, which was, we saw, to me, the most striking example of this has been last week, Wisconsin, what was it? The state Supreme Court struck down the stay-at-home order. And I don't know if you saw the picture that came out, I think Thursday, of just a packed bar, right? It was like 3 hours after the order had been deemed unlawful. People were just packed in the bar, which goes against what I would have expected. I would have been expecting something more like what you're saying, where people are thinking cautiously and thinking around, how do I keep myself and my family and the people around me safe? Do you think that there's going to be I guess really the question is, how long lived will that trend be? On the last episode of Future of Retail, we caught up with Zach Aarons of Metaprop, who has invested in technology companies, and really his day to day is keeping an eye on what's next in terms of commercial real estate. And his opinion was that retailers are going to have to correct for an increased demand for hygiene and cleaner, experiences that provide a little bit more breathing room. You have that opinion on one side, and on the other side, you have straight facts and data showing crowded bars in Wisconsin. So are we just going to see a little bit of both, or do you have an expectation or a prognostication on what the winning trend is going to be there?
I think it's interesting, that Wisconsin picture, not a mask in sight, was there?
Yeah.
It looked like it was taken before all this happened, right? So I think it's I think that was an interesting scenario, and I think there's going to be some geographical differences. I mean, you're in San Francisco, right? I'm in LA. I think we're very cautious in general in California, and I think that we're really going to have to show, reopen with social distancing and make sure our customers are safe. And I do tend to agree with Zach that I think that's going to be the trend going forward. I look at Wisconsin as more of an anomaly, but maybe there are parts of the middle of the country or the Southwest where that won't be an anomaly, because it hasn't had to be. I think in general, any visual cue that a retailer or a restaurant can give to a customer that we are, taking measures to create safety and keeping our guests safe, is going to be a big plus going forward. And whether that be like a little more distance between tables, or maybe more partitions, or all the servers wearing masks, I think that's going to be the more the bigger trend going forward.
So as a retailer, how do you plan around this? And I think my question is, the level to which you plan around it, I think will indicate the longevity of the trend, or the, how long you think that trend will actually last. So for example, at Kura, or among your restaurant circle and people that you're talking to, are they planning fundamental changes to the layout of their store to allow for more space between booths and between tables, where you're making really a long-term commitment there to that standard? Or, are you thinking of this as like a 6 to 12 month trend that eventually we're going to be, in 5 years, you might walk around and not even see a physical manifestation that coronavirus ever happened? How deeply are you going to, build these expected trends into your strategy as a retailer?
Sure. So I'm hearing varying strategies across the industry. I will tell you at Kura, we're not doing anything drastic right now, except for like alternating seating and making sure that families sit together and that you're not sitting next to anyone who's not within your household for within 6 feet,
Okay.
and really making sure that people have that social distance in mind. But I do know that there are some other brands out there who are doing some heavy remodels, creating, well, just stuff like contactless payment, but also putting up like higher partitions in between booths. We're not doing that yet.
I see.
I look at this more. The funny thing is, I just think it's changing so fast. And as we look at how fast the world is changing, it's like whatever is right to do today with this coronavirus may not be the right thing to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we're trying not to be super reactive, but also trying to address the concerns today and then see kind of where this goes. And honestly, I think there's going to be impact on this. I think it's going to impact our business, honestly, forever in some way, much like 9/11 did with security. I mean, we took all kinds of measures initially after 9/11 that really, only a fraction of those are still in place, but there's still a fraction of those in place. I mean, you're not driving your relatives to the gate anymore and waving at them as their plane pulls away. That just doesn't happen anymore. But that was a regular part of life before 9/11. And I think I see some of that happening in the restaurant and retail industry as well. It's just a matter of what's going to stay and what's not. How are people going to feel safe?
Right. Yeah. And this is the constant struggle of people in real estate, and to some degree, any business owner and operator, right? Is that you're getting daily information that is swinging you one direction or another, but you need to be making decisions that you'll live with for years and years. So it's really hard to, take the information for what it is and react accordingly, and deciding whether it's the first data point of a overarching trend, or is it, it'll be corrected tomorrow. So that's been the huge challenge. If we were to take a step up in terms of, all right, we've talked about sort of in the store, Kura's reopening, there's, guidelines in place across counties. Some of them might stick in the long term in terms of the consumer's expectation. But if we were to talk about overall consumer trends and like retail brand to retail brand, another really interesting story that's been developing is this wave of bankruptcies, right? And so I think there's a few ways to interpret this. One, you could say, well, really, this is just accelerating what's already been brewing for some time. These are brands that have had a lot of market share being taken over by e-commerce over the recent years. J.C. Penney, for example, Stage Stores, I think was the other big one in the last week. Big box retail for, hard goods, material goods has been being, taken over by e-commerce for some time. And your typical anchor for a shopping center might need to change. So from your perspective, how is the retail landscape going to change in terms of what retailers thrive and which ones die in the next 5 years as these deeper changes in consumer behavior start to take root?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the camp, the first camp you mentioned, where I think some of these retailers that are really getting hammered through this and have declared bankruptcy are ones that were kind of dying on the vine anyway. And this was the knockout punch. But I do look at that kind of format of the large format anchor the traditional anchor used to be in a mall or in a large center. I see them struggling through this quite frankly. And I look at just because I think already Amazon was taking such a big bite out of their business and their business model has changed. And if they don't change with that, then they're going to struggle. Now, as far as we look at, from a smaller retailer or restaurant type of point of view, we usually pick the large anchors. We draft off those anchors, and if a Neiman Marcus attracts X amount of customers, per week, we expect to get a certain percent of that as a part of our business. And if they're no longer there, that's going to be a huge problem.
I mean,
So
that's the anchor, right? That's the entire point.
yeah, that's the whole reason to go to the center. I mean, and then, but as you've seen in recent years, that even that trend's been changing before this. Centers are becoming more food centric now. There's more food
Yep.
than ever in centers. We may even be a little over fooded at this point. There's more like entertainment in centers now. So it's more experiences that you can't order through Amazon, whether that be, escape rooms or laser tag or movies or whatever that experience is. You can't order online, that you have to go do yourself. Those are all kind of coming up more. So that trend was already shifting.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at anchors, we're looking at who's going to be there in the long term. I mean, all of a sudden now, where maybe we were leaning towards some of these larger 10 years ago, some of these larger guys like a J.C. Penney, now maybe there's a return to say, hey, grocery anchors, look at grocery. Grocery's never going away. Maybe some grocers will go away, but we see how resilient grocery is right now. It's actually done better in this circumstance. So maybe that's the anchor we look for. And it kind of, it's going to be evolving through all this. And so we have to make sure that our real estate is good enough now to stand on its own, and that we're not so dependent on an anchor that may or may not be there in a few years.
Yeah, no, the trend towards experiential retail has been something we've been tracking and honestly preaching a little bit. We're in the business of retail growth, and we see the highest growth, at least pre-COVID, in fitness and restaurants, really. There's a dichotomy here, right? Where there's been a trend towards things that you need to be there in person to do. And now suddenly no one wants to be around anybody else. And literally the government, our orders currently are to not be around other people. So how much of that is going to take root? And do you think it's possible that experiential retail actually takes a left turn and doesn't end up being the overarching trend in retail as a result?
That's actually a great question, Stephen. And to tell you the truth, I have to give that a little bit of thought, because I was just on a call this morning, and one of the people on the call works with a lot of large experiential retailers, and they're reopening in some places. And I don't know if I heard him wrong or what, but he said they were opening at somewhere between 10 to 20% of the revenues that they had before this. Now, granted, it's still a kind of a sticky time right now. And I'm like, wow, if in the restaurant business, if I'm 10 or 20%, not just of my total revenues, if I'm 10 to 20% off my previous revenues, that's a big problem. So I can't even imagine being 80 to 90% off, and how that would even pencil. So I do think they're going to have some kind of changes in what kind of experiential, what they're able to offer on that entertainment side. But I don't think it's going away. I just think it might change, because it's still something that people still have, I think, this innate desire to get out and do things with their friends. And so maybe it's something that's not quite jam-packed as it was before. I mean, we were seeing a trend before all this happened of really densifying real estate. And it was, how can we get more people into smaller spaces? Retailers are going smaller. Restaurants are going smaller. These entertainment venues were like, let's jam a bunch of people in because that's what people like. And now we just got to all think of that a little differently now.
I think what's really going to carry experiential retail through is just the cultural demand. I think the younger generations coming in, millennials, Gen Z, really just value experiences over material things. And I think that's, those types of trends are generation to generation. So I think we're coming into that era right now, and we've been seeing it over the last 5 to 10 years. And that will be, I think, the dominant cultural demand from the consumer side over the next at least 10 to 15 more years, until something else happens. I think online experiences need to evolve further. We also spoke last time with Zach Aarons about, I don't know if you've seen like the Fortnite concerts, online concerts, and these like VR experiences, but it's really not evolved enough right now to be able to come close to supplanting the in-person experience. So give it 10 to 15 more years, I say, for this generation to get on the older side, and for the newer generation that's more tech native, that has grown up on VR experiences. Hopefully the technology is developed at that point. I think really until then, experiential retail does need to figure out how to evolve, but the demand is gonna remain.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I have 3 boys. My youngest is 14, and he cannot stop playing Fortnite. And he's in tournaments all the time. He's doing all this stuff. But I look at that and go, he's going to love this for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
He's in that age group. So there's going to have to be, and of course, when people have a strong desire to do something, that's where the retail and kind of adjust to that to provide that use for them so that people can thrive in that.
Yeah. Now, all of this, okay, so we've talked about consumers and how that behavior might change. We talked about retailers and how they might need to adapt. All of this eventually trickles its way back into the real estate itself. Now, I think you have an interesting perspective here because you were, a senior development manager, do I have that right, at Panera in 2010?
Yes.
And I'm curious if you're seeing any analogies to the real estate market back then versus now, with just the similarity being that there's so many vacancies that are popping up, and really, the demand for space is shifting from a seller's market to a buyer's market. There is so much less demand right now because honestly, retailers are going out of business. What are you expecting to see as a retailer navigating real estate over the next 6 to 12 months or 1 to 5 years past that? Are you expecting prices to bottom out at some point? Like how do you draw from your experience back in 2010 and what you saw with Panera and apply it to today?
Well, it's kind of interesting because in 2010 at Panera, we took a stance of being very, while everyone else was hunkering down because, they were losing money or going out of business. Fortunately for Panera, we were actually in a position of making money. So we looked at that as saying, this is a great opportunity to grow, to grow faster and take advantage of this real estate market. And we struck some pretty aggressive deals. I look back on that now and going, wow, that's we got some pretty good rent deals considering we were generally taking what I would consider at least the best spot in the shopping center. I even remember talking to some of the landlords saying, man, if we get you in, then others will follow. And so we're going to, this is a big deal for us. And we'll cut you a better deal than we're cutting everyone else. I think the same thing's going to happen. I haven't seen it quite yet. It was interesting. I'm still getting calls for what I think are overinflated rents. Even with some of the retail vacancy that's coming up and just seems imminent that there's going to be more and more. I mean, we talk about these retail bankruptcies. I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg right now.
I agree.
It seems like every day someone new comes in, so that you just kind of go, oh, okay, they're a goner too. And so far, like I said, I haven't been surprised by any of them, but at the same time, it's still just beginning. So as that happens, obviously more retail space comes up, and as supply goes up and demand goes down, economics 101. I'm expecting to be able to cut some very good deals, and not just on the rent side, but also on some of the lease points that have been harder to get in the past. I think will also ease up a little bit.
Are you expecting the timeline on this to also be accelerated, given how pretty much every other timeline in COVID has been like shockingly fast? Are you thinking that because in Panera 2010, right, this is a year and a half to 2 years past the economic collapse. We're 2 months into this crisis. Do you think we're gonna need to wait 2 years to see this bottoming out of real estate prices, or is it going to happen much sooner?
I'm projecting my unscientific projection is somewhere between 6 to 12 months. I do think I think we'll see it sooner. And I think it has to do with, I think a lot of folks that are in the industry remember 08, 09, 10, and how long they had to sit on empty properties. And so that's, so I see it kind of accelerating a little bit so they can fill some of their vacancies. And I don't know, I'm speaking for the landlord right now, but, and then folks who are still growing and, almost every major retailer and restaurant, even the ones that are healthy that I've heard, have kind of pared back their growth plans a little bit based on this. Now that might change in a few months, but it's kind of like, hey, we were going to open 100. Now we're going to open 60 or something like that. So it's just stuff like that. So I am expecting that there's going to be some big opportunity out there to nab it, but probably not for a few months.
Okay. The last big question I have, which is on this topic of real estate, I think what the big trend over the last 10 years has been Retailpocalypse, right? This was all the rage to talk about, in the 2010s as things were coming back and as we were recovering. And we saw the rise of discount shopping and QSRs and the lower price point kind of replacing your traditional department stores, and a wave of bankruptcies and a moving out of some of the old guard, leaving a lot of shopping malls in middle America unanchored. And honestly, they became what we call Class C, Class D shopping centers that haven't even recovered even, up until pre-COVID. They still weren't where they were in their heyday. Now, this is going to cause another wave of that, and we're going to have these C's and D's pushed even further down into distressed, being distressed. Is this the tipping point where we start to think about redeveloping these shopping malls, or I guess what is your opinion of the future of some of these shopping malls that just get pushed past the point of no return? What do we do with them?
I kind of feel like we were already there for those, for like the lower end malls. There's so many of them that have kind of collapsed through these last like 10 years or so. And in talking to some of the mall developers over the years, and talked to a lot of them, the Simons and the Mesa Riches and the Westfields, is that they're lower. I guess I would say they're distressed properties. They're getting creative, and they're either they're talking about making office space out of it, or actually I was talking to one developer who was taking one of the major anchors and making like an indoor sports complex, with volleyball courts, basketball courts. I mean, this is at a mall, and so I just think they're going to have to get creative like that, or a lot of times those are properties that are sitting right in the middle of suburbia, or where they could probably get a nice return for it, and it could turn into housing or something else. So that's going to happen. Now for the A malls, the ones that are stronger, I do see a potential softening in those as well. We didn't see it that much in the last 10 years. Those malls just tend to get stronger. But I do see some of those weakening as well, as you start seeing some of these larger boxes, file bankruptcy. They're clearly, even if they don't close all their stores, they're clearly not going to be growing for a little bit. So I do see some changes that are going to be happening on that front as well.
All right, great, Robert. That does it for my questions. Do you have any advice for people in your position at other retail brands, how they should be thinking about this or strategizing? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you're listen to your guest. They have a lot to say, and you definitely want to let them feel like they can come back safely and enjoy your product, and kind of adhere to their requests. And as far as people in my position, I would say, while you're listening, don't overreact, don't overcorrect, because that could be a very costly mistake that could change in 6 months to a year. So just be ready, and don't jump too fast.
Great advice. All right, Robert, thanks for joining me. It was super fun talking with you about what might happen in the future of retail. More information on some of the stuff we talked about is going to be in the description below. Thanks for watching, and check us out next time.
Thank you.